Okay, let's start. Today we have a very special artist who will be doing a heavy paint workshop for us. She's an assistant art director and visual development artist for feature and TV animation from Los Angeles. She's worked for Netflix, Cartoon Network, Warner Brothers, DreamWorks, and Insomniac Games. She's also a moderator for our server. Please welcome Karen Kuo.
Thank you. Wow, what an intro. That was fantastic. Thank you. Hello. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. Hopefully not 2 a.m. anywhere. So heavy paints. Yes, today we're talking about heavy paint. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. Heavy paint. It's can be hard to get used to using at first because you open it and you're like, what the heck is this? There's tiny panel at the top, and are there layers? I don't know. It's weird. So hopefully we'll go through, and I'll show you how I've set it up, where there's like a ton of hidden submenus essentially and panels that you can open and use to customize the tools that can feel a little bit like crazy at first. So I've reset my user space so you can see what factory comes out as now. Factory reset. And yeah, at first you're like, this is like kind of crazy looking. And I kind of set it up where it feels a little closer to like Photoshop, because that's the program I largely use. But I'll go through the panels so you can always customize and change it to like whatever works to your workflow. So starting from the beginning. Okay, cool. So if you you open Heavy Paint, and I think it's the same across like iPad or like I'm using it on my iMac because you can also download it for like iOS. I think you can do it for Windows as well. But I'm using it on my Cintiq because it's a little bigger. But it's you can still find all the same panels and do the same things on like your iPad, which I also have set up the same way. So just to go over like what's basically here when you first open it, you'll be like, oh wow, there's like a hue panel, like a saturation and a value. And it's a little this initial setup is like a little misleading. Like if you go towards the top of your values in saturation, if you like max it out, it doesn't turn white. It just turns like very saturated. So if you drag it upwards, it'll continue. I guess it'll like kind of go backwards saturation wise, but it can be a little confusing, like not super intuitive, especially if you're used to like how the sliders in Photoshop work. So if you go to this little bottom corner, they put it really low, but you can move it. All the panels are movable, which is great. But I always move this up because I don't want to look all the way down there. So this is like the tiny like settings panel. So just basics, like the top is like a little floppy disk. It takes you to this other menu where you can do like really basic save, import, export, resize as well, like a panel if you want to change the size of it. Um, the thing with Heavy Paint I've noticed is it's actually like a vector-based app, so it doesn't use pixels natively, so it's kind of great because you can paint kind of small. Because I have noticed like if you go above, like usually for like anything I want to print or have used like in any professional manner, or even just like I want to make it into a poster, I usually paint at like 3K to 4K, right? So like I have enough pixels to do stuff. But uh Heavy Paint really doesn't love going above that too much, especially like on an iPad. I think if you do that, you'll start running into like it'll give you little warnings of memory and it'll crash. But because it's vector, you can actually work like smaller. I usually work between like 1 to 2,000 pixels. And when you export, like if you go to the save, oh gosh, okay, save. If you go to export, you can tell it to export at a specific percentage. It can like it can blow up the painting essentially, without you won't lose any like resolution because it's all vector. Um, and I'll go over how to like export stuff at the end as well because there's a few fun, cool things in here. Um, but something that you have to be a little careful about is that it doesn't always stay as a vector. So like if you import an image, for instance. Like you can import PNGs in for like reference, or if you're like, oh, I have a painting I like, I want to, work on it. Or, if you work back and forth between Heavy Paint and Photoshop, just be aware when you import it, it does come in as pixels. So it'll A, be heavier, and B, it'll, if you resize it up and down, it will become like kind of grainy and weird. As well as if you merge layers, it will immediately become a pixel like layer. And you will lose any of the, how Heavy Paint has the cool like playback thing, you will lose all the information from those layers that you merge down. It's pretty interesting. I think they actually they like nest their undos and redos by layer. So sometimes if you like redo or undo stuff and you're like, why isn't it working? It could be because you're in the wrong layer. But if you merge it, you will lose all of it. Yes. So that's a little freakier. I generally like work in multiple layers, but I don't merge them. Like you can my workaround for this is I generally will, if I get to a point where I'm like, okay, I kind of want to flatten this, but I don't want to lose these layers, I'll just export them and then like export them as a flattened PNG and then re-import it. So I get like a flat painting base to paint on, and it's not as heavy. But in general, like layering, uh, merging, it can really weigh down your file, which is a bit like counterintuitive to what you would expect, right? You're like, I'm going to merge, it'll become lighter. No, the file will become more unstable. And in general, I would say like Heavy Paint, like I don't really go above 4 layers just because it starts to have a little bit of stability issues. There's like a workaround where it's like you can either just continue to create new files and import your flattened file and then paint on top of that, or just move to Photoshop. But honestly, like I've just found that I've just tried to kind of keep the files a little lower in quantity to keep it, um, but yeah. So yes, that's the small weird thing about Heavy Paint. So knowing that, it's like, okay, kind of understand why some things are set up the way they are. But anyways, so how to make this more usable? Because this is like making me sad already when I see this very minimalist. I mean, it's very cool, but it's like hard to use. So let's open some panels. So we can go to, let's see. So yes, I pulled up this. So we've talked about the save a little bit. So we're moving into this settings panel, which also can be pretty intimidating because it's text only and you don't really know what's in here. So UI scale is useful. Sometimes if you open the app, I think default it can be a little tiny. If you feel like, oh, I'm looking at like really tiny bits, you can essentially like set the scale to like essentially multiply like how big. I would say like going to like 1.2 is like not gonna break it, but past that, sometimes the brushes and things will start to spill out of their borders. And it can start to get like really crazy, especially if you're like on iPad and you're like, oh my gosh, I now have like 3 inches to paint on. So I would use it like very sparingly. And you also have to restart Heavy Paint for it to take effect. But I'm gonna leave it at, I'm not gonna touch it. I'm gonna leave it at 1. Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna reset it. All right. In general, don't mess with that too much, unless you are like having tiny button issues. But the thing, okay, so what we're really after though is, first of all, is changing out this hue, saturation, and value bar. It's like a little hard to use, only because I feel like it's like a little, I don't know, it's a little harder to control. Like it's just a little different from the Photoshop one I'm used to. I feel like it definitely like keep it, but uh actually, it's not in that panel. Sorry. There's so many panels. Not really. But anyways, in the center hue panel, there's like 3 dots at the top. So if you press that, there's actually another preferences panel that deals solely with this panel thing. So you can be like, hey, I want like a more traditional box, um, like hue shifter, like more like Photoshop. Or if you want it to be more like the type where you can kind of pick the hue and then decide your, I think this is like the classic Photoshop sort of feeling. There's also RGB sliders, which I like to use. That's like a little it's like stripped down, but somehow it's like still works pretty well. So it depends. There's also like, yeah, this is the classic one. So I'm gonna use the RGB sliders because I'm more used to that. But this way you can like customize to what you like. Um, so anyways, uh, so that's cool. So we've set that up. We're like, great. This, what is this, right? You look at this and you're like, this is a size slider, which is cool. This is a hue jitter. I'm not hue jitter, yeah, color jitter. It essentially like creates like a lot of color variation if you love that like weird Spider-Verse-y crunchy stuff. Without it, you pretty much just get like a flat. Let me try a circle brush. Oh, fan brush is good. You can kind of see like flat, it just kind of creates this, and then as you go up, you can get like a little hue variation. If you go up really high, you can get like crazy rainbows. And you can even adjust how these like populate. Like currently it's kind of coming out radially, but I'll go into how you can edit the like brush attributes after I set up the panels. So cool. We're like, okay, we now have one thing. So now it's like, okay, but I don't really love how this is all clustering. You can actually like resize the panels. It's it's only on the edges, on the left and right sides of all the panels, but you can like pull them. Or maybe it's only on the right side. Oh, it's only on one side. Maybe. Okay, well, you can essentially pull. I know it's like I think I randomly found out about this and I was like, this is awesome. You just be careful. Sometimes it'll like break a little bit, right? And I also realized if you go into, is it the 3 panel here? No, if you go into the settings here, you can actually like it'll kind of give you like essentially this is like some of it is settings. Like I generally get rid of hold for eye drop because sometimes if I'm lassoing, it'll suddenly eye drop and it'll interrupt. So I turn that off. But if you like that as a feature, it's pretty nice. It's nice on iPad if you don't have like access to a keyboard. I generally don't tell it to start with a new page, and I don't tell it to auto size new page because I just like sometimes I'm like, hey, I just want to paint landscapes, and I made this size I really like, and I can decide when I want to make a new page. Because if you keep those on every time you launch Heavy Paint, it'll make a new page for you, which can get a little bit annoying if you're like, I'm just trying to go back to finish my painting. So I turn those off. Anti-aliasing, winning, autosave, keep all that stuff on. Stroke sounds, don't turn it on unless you want to go crazy. Let's see. I think that's about it. Everything else I don't super touch down here. There are a couple of submenus. So toolbar is essentially this brush panel, but if you check it, it'll separate itself from it, which is great. So then you're not shoving them together. So let's say you're like, okay, I can have my color bar at the top and you could drag it. You can make it whatever. You can make it like the Photoshop panel, shove it to your left or right, depending on um, what size, like you want the brushes to be at. You can't really change the icon size unless you go into UI resizing. But then you're like, okay, great. So now I've created this panel of things. I still like personally, I don't really love how huge these uh like rollers are. They just take up a lot of space. Like for me, it's like I want to have all my tools, but I want to also maximize how much canvas I have because I really hate like when all the panels are like 2/3 of your screen and you're working on like a little square. So you can actually change. You can actually ask like set up like a minimal version of those. So I believe it's what is this? Oh yeah, that. Oh, so you can also actually adjust this toolbar here. That's cool. Um, sorry, I'm like talking to myself while I'm figuring this out. Oh, that's so weird. Okay, I'm also learning stuff with you all because this software is so funny. So let's see, tools by type. There is tools by type and shapes, but I feel like they're a little redundant. They essentially jump like they edit settings within the brushes that we can just go over later. So I'm not going to turn those on or really go over them. You can always check them out, but it's essentially just like tools by type will change how the brush interacts, like whether it's like a paintbrush or becomes like a lasso brush, or an eraser or a smudge. Like it just changes that characteristic, but you can't set any brushes to that mode um, within that panel. You can do it separately, but shapes I've actually never used, so I don't know what that is. Sorry. Let's see. So okay, so we've done the toolbar. Oh yes, so I wanted to figure out a way to minimize these gigantic size and jitter panels. So I believe it's, let's see, swatches. Actually, something that's kind of useful is this color swatch. Sorry, I'm like tangenting myself. Is this color swatch key? If you're like, oh, it's just kind of like that panel in Photoshop where you can save out like different colors. If you have them eye dropped, you can just like add them. I don't know where that one vanished. But it's kind of nice if you kind of want a little bit of color history because it doesn't show you any way to do that otherwise. And then let's see, mouse, tips, toolbar, color swatches, and controls. Maybe it's okay. Oh, here we go. So over here, uh, you'll see like size slider, color jitter slider, show last color, and color circle. So I usually get rid of the circle slider. It actually doesn't vanish. It becomes this little circle. And if you drag up and down, it functions identically to the brush size, like the big slider. It's just like a bit smaller, which I kind of like. Hue jitter, you can also shrink. The jitter slider can also become like a nice little 3 square. But it is a little bit finicky. Like it goes from 0 to like 100 in like very little steps. So I don't really use it too often. And if I do, I usually use it very low. So I generally just keep it pretty minimal. But if you like to adjust it a lot, you may want to keep the slider. But like, yeah, like as you can see here, like when I pull the panel a little smaller, sometimes it kind of vanishes from its boundaries, but I don't really care too much. I just want it to be visible. So I have that. I have this. Yeah, generally I keep all my stuff at the top, just so it's like a little easier to see. There we go. All right, and then we're like, oh yes, layers. So if you go to this tiny little sub menu, our favorite tiny menu in the corner, the 3 squares stacked on each other, that creates your layer menu. It's super teeny. Sometimes if you click it, you won't be able to find it. So just keep an eye out when you click it. It's in a corner somewhere. So you can see like the one layer, and you're like, oh great. But if you click on the layer itself, it will create a layer attribute menu. So anytime you open a submenu, if you click away, it will vanish, right? Which is fine for certain situations. But if you're like, I really like being able to have this panel because it lets me create masks, it lets me delete. I can move the layer up and down within the layer editor because dragging is a little, I don't know if you can drag. Can you drag? No, you can't drag the layers around within the editor. So you have to use this panel rather regularly. So if you click on the very top of it, it will pin it. And sometimes there's a bug where the pin circle will be gigantic. Just unpin it and pin it again, and it'll be normal. It doesn't always happen, but if you see that and you're like, oh my god, what is this full moon? It's just a small bug. That's relatively easy to fix. So now I'm like, okay, great. I like to usually cluster them together. So I have a layer menu and I can like adjust. So you can adjust like the opacity, of it. You can kind of fun. These are weird. I don't really use them, Rasm, but you can like pixelate your paintings. You can blur them, and I do like HEAVYPAINT's like blur kind of remains pixely, which is kind of fun. And you can add grain, so it's like a noise filter built into it. But I enjoy that. That's kind of an option. You can delete. You can move the layers up and down, and show visibility or not. And then this little omnidirectional tool lets you move and resize. Something to be aware of, if you resize, you can't undo the resize. You'll have to manually resize it back. So just make sure that's what you want before you hit the check, because yeah, that's kind of a one-way street. You can duplicate, you can clip layers. So just like Photoshop, if you're like, oh yes, I've made this incredible painting. Like, look at this. It's masterpiece. Oh yeah. And you're like, oh, but I want to like non-destructively add textures or patterns or, just paint within the shape. You can totally clip down, which is great. And you can also, what is it, lock the alphas. So it's the same thing where once you are happy with your shape and you lock the alpha and it's also clipped down, that's cool. You can paint with it, right? And you're like, oh yeah, awesome. So that's kind of cool. I think those tools like alone really help with the minimal layer quantity. So I do enjoy those. Hey, let me just delete these layers so we're not staring at this crazy thing. Okay. So cool. Now we've created almost a full palette. The next thing I want to go over is brushes. So there are so many brushes, but also not really, because a lot of them are kind of crazy, right? You'll like open it and be like, ooh, like I love this tree brush. And you'll use it and you'll be like, oh my God, I'm not really sure what to do with that. Like maybe a bush, and then what am I going to do after that? So the thing is, you can actually edit the attributes of the brush quite extensively. If you click on any of the brushes, it'll open this brush panel, which is actually quite large. And I usually pin it also to the left because you can, depends, I guess. You can also save out brushes that you customize within this separately, so you don't have to always have this open. I think it's fine on desktop. In iPad, this panel gets a little bit like difficult to deal with because it's huge. But for instance, you're like, okay, I think a good example is like the rake tool. Rake tool is great, right? You can get like that cool, ooh, like multiple rake look. But then you're like, oh, it'd be nice if I could like change the direction, or, there's like a lot of things you can actually change about it from here. So going over this intense panel, so the top square is essentially like all the different footprints, essentially like the stamp of what the brush is. So currently, like the rake defaults to rake. There's two kinds of rakes. You can even do one that has more lines if you feel very exciting, which is cool. If, for instance, you're like, oh, I want like a circle stamp, it gets weird, right? But it essentially uses all the rules of this rake brush, but then just changes its footprint. Some of them work, some of them can be freaky, but it's fun because they all sometimes have like very weird niche uses that you could use to like create like cool effects. So I think it's really worth investigating each of these when you like as you're building your own brush set within this. It's really good just to look at like what everything can do, because it's really different. And each brush behaves really differently. And there's like, yeah, it's like you can get a little ant trail. I don't know. If you're like, I have to paint a lot of ants in a line, like this is the perfect tool for it. Um, or if you're like, I don't know, if you want to paint a ghost banner and then fill in the lines. I don't know. That might be too niche. But there's no tool too niche, to be honest. So just from this one rake tool, just messing around with like the stamps, yeah, you can get a lot of cool effects, right? Which is like fantastic. So then you go down here and you're like, it can look really intimidating because it's a little bit like, oh my gosh, what is everything? Generally stretch, distort, noise. I don't really touch too much. I think they'll change like probably like the quantity of noise and like how the footprint looks. You can always mess around and see. But I usually when I mess with them, they get like kind of wonky. So like below this are the size, follow, and smooth panels. So smooth is cool. I generally don't use it too much because it starts to you don't really see a huge difference depending on the brush. I think in like some of the like pencil and line, let's see, I can try pencil. don't really know what the difference is there. So let's just pretend I didn't go into that one. Anyways, for follow, follow is really cool. So follow essentially is really powerful for any of the like drawing tools. So let me delete this thing here. So for instance, if you're using, it's good for any directional brush. So like this, yeah, okay, this tree brush is a good example. So this brush is like kind of crazy, right, on its own. Actually, no, wait, there's a better brush that shows that. Let me see. Pills. Okay. Yes, this pill brush is kind of crazy, right? It's essentially like a direction. It's like a pen drawing tool, but they've added this like nutso pattern that kind of randomly generates as you draw along a line. If you go here though, like so currently it's directional, which means that the direction you're going in dictates how it's creating this pattern. Tilt, it'll essentially follow one direction then. So it's creating one stamp and then maintaining that direction. So you get like a very different look. First, we'll like essentially take the first thing you made and then commit to that as the omnidirectional tool. Last is crazy because it will wait until you finish drawing and then it will like bake everything into that shape. Yeah, it's like it's weird. Initial is a like kind of a weird in between first and last, where it'll like slightly move and then it'll just bake itself into a shape. So initial's like a little bit underwhelming out of all of them because it doesn't really do much. But that's okay because there's a billion settings. So for instance, you're like, you see that and you're like, okay, that's like cool, but this brush is still like pretty insane. So we can look at like, let's see. Oh, and I'll go over like this sub menu within the brush when we set our brushes as well. Sorry, there's like a ton of menus. You're probably like, what is this new menu? We haven't talked about it, and I will, I promise. Anyways, so let's see. A good one is maybe chalk or a good brush. Hatch tool. Where is okay? So Hatch. Okay, Hatch is good. Hatch is cool because I actually paint with this more regularly. Like, there's definitely like a difference between. There's some brushes that give texture, so they're great, but they're hard to paint with. And then there are like painterly brushes, and then there's like all the lasso tools, which I'll go over in a bit. But like Hatch is a good example of like it's a pretty interesting brush. Like out of the can, it's like a slightly angled square brush that creates kind of like a fuzzy feeling, which is kind of cool if you want to get like a bit of painty. But I didn't initially like this brush very much because of the weird angle it kind of goes at. It's like always at like a 45. But you can change that if you are like, oh, I want to do directional, then it will function as like whatever direction you draw in will maintain this square shape, which is kind of nice. And you can see a little more of like how the brush is behaving if you turn on a little bit of hue jitter, um, which is kind of crazy. But if you're like, oh yeah, this is maybe like a little too textured for me, you can try like the different footprints for brushes. Oh, that's so scary looking. Tilt's kind of cool. Like, yeah, I really encourage like mess with the brushes. Just changing like a few of the follows and some of the footprints. You can get all kinds of really bizarre and awesome like tools to create like some really weird fun stuff. So okay, we've gone through these few things. So there is actually a pressure and a distance and a tilt setting, which you can essentially just toggle on and off. From what I've noticed, the pressure, it doesn't like pressure does not dictate opacity. So almost all the tools in here are pretty much like 100% opacity. You can paint 100% and then lower the layer opacity so you get like a little see-through, but you're pretty much committing to like pretty like it's like a little bit like painting with like a circle brush that doesn't give you a lot of opacity jitter. So for here, when it says size and pressure, it's just kind of telling you like the scale of the brush stamp will shrink or grow depending on how much you press down. And distance is, I don't know how to use it still. It's very strange. Essentially, it's like the further you go from it, I think, the smaller it grows. It's very strange, but it's fun. I don't know. There's probably some use for it. And tilt is also weird. So these are like, I usually don't really turn them on very much because they start to get a little bit like I feel like I'm starting to fight the brush as opposed to just using it as a tool. But maybe you're like, I like it. Maybe I want to try that. That's great. So below that are then I guess there is opacity. There's opacity and then there's pressure. But it's like pretty imperfect. Like if you turn it on, it's not gonna behave as you want. You just get a lot of like ghosty artifacting. Um, so I encourage you to try it, but I generally just keep it all the way 100% because it behaves kind of funky otherwise. Let's see. Oh yes, this is kind of fun. So this mode draw is pretty weird. Essentially, if you're like, hey, I am using this brush and I'm painting with it, right? So this little brush icon means it's functioning like a regular brush that you can paint with, right? But you can change that mode. So you can change it to like a lasso. So it would keep that shape, but it'll turn it into a lasso. And this one looks crazy. That's interesting. Huh, never done that. Let's see what this looks like. Oh yes, there we go. That's a little better. So essentially it'll like take all the information of this brush, but then like turn it into a lasso tool. So you can get a lot of funky um, like effects out of it. Or you can be like, oh, I want this like ribbony lasso, which is also very cursed because it's like moving the whole time. But essentially, yeah, it's surprisingly with like, I think maybe there's like 20 brushes. You can get like, I don't even know how many permutations you can get out of it just messing with these different um, settings. Like they're pretty nuts. So definitely explore. And if the thing is, if you do edit all this stuff right, and you like go to a different brush and then you come back to it, it will hold on to all those settings. So if you're like, oh God, I've ruined this brush, you can just go up to these little three dots and reset the tool, and that will like send it back to its original version. So that way, there's no high stakes if you completely like mutate this brush into something horrifying. So cool. Uh, you don't really need to touch the bottom stuff. I think it's mostly just like how the texture jitter interacts, but I think it's might be getting a little finicky. Also, I realize you've all sat through like 40 minutes of panel talk. So, uh, sorry. So if you want to get into the like minutia of messing with how the color jitter looks, this is like really gnarly. Let's say though you make a brush that you're like, oh yeah, I've like fine tuned it to like exactly what I want. If you go into this three dot panel as well, you can, or I think it's actually not that. It's next to it. It's this little save icon. If you save it, it will save the brush, and will appear. Did it appear? Did it do it? Or maybe the save. Oh wait, I think the save just like solidifies it into this brush setting itself. And then if you go into the three dots, usually what happens is I just duplicate it. I think there's no way to save. So if you duplicate it, it will create like tree 2, and that will be the new brush you've made. And you can always go in and rename it somehow. I'm pretty sure. I think in here. Yes, you can rename it. So you can rename it to like crazy fuzzy or something. Um, and then you'll have it, which is great. So essentially, like that's something that's nice. The only downside I've also noticed is you can never change the order of your panel, like your brushes. So when you make new brushes, they'll immediately populate to the end. So you could, if you're obsessive like I was, and essentially like create a ton of brushes in the order you want so that they'll appear in the order you want in the toolbar. But so far I haven't found a way to like adjust that. So diving into brushes, there's actually quite a few brushes. If you hit the little plus tool here, it'll kind of show like everything that you can find. Um, and if you hit the hearts, it'll highlight what you've already favorited. So, you can either turn all of them on and then try them and then like delete as you go. But what I've oh, oopsies. But what I've seen is like the brushes that I think are like pretty critical that like I would always have. Because the thing is, it's a little misleading. It's not even just brushes, it's like functions as well. So like the redo and undo panel are not super necessary here because I like having them up here in this panel. You can ask for redo and undo. Yeah. So you can essentially just shove it into your top panel. Since it's kind of a little bit of wasted space, I just ask for it to be not ask. I just tell the app I want to have it there. But if you're like, oh yes, you could also put it in your panel editor if you wanted to, but depends. Grayscale is a great tool. It just essentially toggles between grayscale and color. Mirror is interesting. It's a little bit like the symmetry tool, but it just flips it for you. Oh my gosh, I have no brushes. That's why I was like, what's happening? All right. Uh, all right. So if you're like, I've made this crazy shape I like, and you hit mirror X, it will mirror across. Oh, it mirrors only on one side. Interesting. Oh, so it does actually function. Just kidding. I've actually never used this tool just now, so we're learning together. Uh, so if you toggle that on and off, it'll essentially just mirror. I guess it looks at the left side, the screen left side image, and it will live mirror it, which is pretty snazzy. So you can have a symmetry tool in it, which is great. Um, let's see. Flip is cool. It just flips it. Stencil is essentially a button for creating like a transparent, like locking the alphas up here in the layer menu. So it's just your preference. Do you want it up there? Do you want it in your tool panel? You can use that if you want. Transform is what I showed earlier, where you can resize and move stuff around. Eraser is great. Erase lasso is also great. Yeah, I don't use the smudge and blur too often, but I usually have one because you never know when you'll need it. And then from here, there's a lot of brushes. I only use like 4, but I think a lot of them have really great niche use. But I would say like I like the fan tool because it's like a lasso fill. There's polygon, and lasso is like the same as fan almost, in my opinion. So I don't really use it. But polygon is great if you want like the like polygonal lassoing, if you want more like geometric shapes. Let's see, rectangle, circle, if you ever need those. I don't usually. Fan gradient's nice because it's kind of like a grad tool that also is a lasso tool. So essentially, like it. Oh gosh, I need to turn that off. Whoa. Okay. Okay. Let's see. This is the fan tool. Okay. So yeah, fan. So fan is like an opaque tool. And then the fan gradient essentially creates like a gradient from the center. So that's actually pretty handy. You sometimes have to be careful about this like line that it can create when you terminate. So generally I use it for like half circle fills because then you don't have to worry about showing where that grad goes. But yeah, small stuff like that. Essentially you can just, I'll just turn on the brushes that I usually use, but I definitely encourage you all to test all the ones you like and see what works well. Pencil brush has always been a little too fine for me, so I usually use the hard round because that's the closest to just like a circle brush. Um, yeah. If you're like, ugh, I don't really love. I think you can like set it, or you can create like taper. And you can also, I usually use, I think it's this square one. You can get like a little bit. You can use like it becomes like a square brush essentially with like a little texture. So that's fun. Else? I think that's largely it for maybe airbrush. For what I generally use, I like paint 90% of my paintings with like the fan tool. Because I'm like more of a lasso painter anyways in Photoshop, so I found that to be great. But definitely, you can push pixels around and use like some of the painterly brushes to create a lot of cool effects. So yeah, that's pretty much everything. Okay, there's one last thing, and I promise we will then get into a fun demo. Thank you all for sitting through this. But there's hotkeys. So there's a ton of hidden commands. Like, let's say, for instance, you've made all these layers, right? And you're like, oh, I want to merge down. But how? There's no button. Like, I almost went crazy trying to find how to merge because I was like, wait, there's got to be a way to merge. Like, they said there was a merge function, but there's no way to do it. If you ever hit H, it will pull up this gigantic hotkey menu that's in here, and you can also change and customize. So the first thing I did was like re-hotkey all of my hotkeys so that they were similar to Photoshop because I can't memorize another hotkey set. But the things I've noticed the most important is like I like to pan around, and eyedropper as space is like a little weird for me, so I changed that to Alt. It will highlight if you make a conflict, right? I don't use blur, so I don't really care. So I usually assign like a weird, like I just assign a number to it because I don't use it. If there's like a conflict erase, I like E. It does have a cool thing where toggle erase appears. If you like hold down the key, it will erase for as long as you hold down the hotkey, and then when you let go, it will revert to the brush you were using. So that could be useful. So I, make it like shit. I mean, oh crap. Sorry. Let's see. Okay, Shift-E. That's a safe one. There we go. Okay, so we have erase and then Shift-E if you want to toggle erase. New layer. It depends. And I'm just used to N's fine, I think, for that. I'll just stick with that. If you want to move between layers, right? Then I just hotkey it to like what's in Photoshop, which is like control brackets. Move layer up, down. I don't do it very often, so I just use you can always conform it essentially. Let's see what else. Merge layer. So here's the merge layer down. Control Shift Command E, and I'm just like Control E, because I don't really use export too often because I use it as an actual. I just use the button. Oh no. There we go. And then size up and down for the brushes. That's fine. Pan. That's what I want as base. Because that way I can, if you just hold down pan, you can like move around, which is great. Yeah, or sometimes I use middle mouse. I guess it depends on how you feel. But some of this stuff kind of vanishes if you don't use it. Can I not do both? Oh, interesting. Oh, so yeah, that's changing the hotkeys makes it a lot nicer in my opinion, because you're not. Also, it gives you a way to be like, hey, can I do something? You can look in here and see, because a lot of times there's some pretty interesting. Like you can toggle black and white. You can flip X. I don't know what party mode is. I'm not gonna press it. You can press it and find out and let me know. So yeah, that's pretty much everything in terms of setting up the final. Yay! um, so now we have essentially like a few more panels and at least a little better understanding of like what everything does. So you can customize and use that. Cool. So I guess we can jump into a demo and I can answer any questions people have because I'm certain there were many because it's a very dense app to parse through. Yeah. Let's see. Let me delete these layers. So let's see. Thank you for, oh wow, I just looked at all the voice chat. Thank you. These are all funny. Oh my god, so many. Anyways, all right. So I'll just slightly talk about like paint workflow for me really quick, and then we can answer questions. So because of how this program exists, where it's like not always super layer friendly, and yeah, you just have to be like a bit more efficient and Spartan about how your painting is structured. I usually like to paint from back to front. In terms of like if it's a landscape very far away, like sky first, distant mountains, then like I think of the pieces as like little cards of like background, middle ground, foreground, super foreground, whatever. Um, and yeah, and I'll just show you. Yeah, because I don't know, talking about it kind of doesn't do much. All right, so let's see. We can do. I had this photo I took a while back of like this crazy sunset, like few weeks ago. I don't have any concept of time, and that's cool. So maybe we'll use that as like a base. Generally, whenever I paint anything, unless it's like if it's like a study to like achieve accuracy, I will paint this painting like one to one, that's like a study. But in this current situation, since it's Saturday and I feel kind of tired, I want to paint something kind of fun. So I sometimes like to gather reference, or if there's a painting or a photo I like, I can use that as kind of inspiration for like color or ideas. So yeah, we can start with this painting and this photo and see like where it goes. But yeah, and I'll show and slightly chat about any weird things I try to do to be more efficient in heavy paint. Um, but I'll generally start with the sky in the back. Yeah, it's really weird. In Photoshop, I like don't use the RGB sliders, but in heavy paint, I think because it's so huge, I get like really fine control of like what color I want. And then if you the circle in the middle, which shows you like the color. So it shows you not only the color on top, but the color below is your current color. So you can kind of measure how far away you're getting, which is nice. But if you put your cursor on top and then hold it like up or down, you can actually change the value. So essentially adds black or it adds white um, to your value. So that's how you can kind of move up and down if you don't want to like manually push everything up. So I think even when you push everything up, yeah, it does. What I like about this slider is if you push to max, it turns white. And if you push to minimum, it turns black. So you don't get as much of like the odd um like limitation. Sorry, Dylan. But yeah, yeah. It's I don't know. I don't know how I got used to using it, but it's it's fun to try. But if not, there's always the other settings. There's like the HSV boxes and ones that make it like not brain melty. If you're like, oh, I don't really want to figure out how to do that, you don't really need to. So yeah. What was I doing? Oh yes. So let's see. So yeah, so this in this situation in my head, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna paint this sunset, and maybe I'll paint some like palm trees because they're cool and they were in that photo. Maybe I'll add some like foreground buildings. So anytime I paint, I think of it that way. I'm like, okay, what's my background? Sky, midground, trees, foreground, maybe mountains, foreground, some small buildings. Maybe I'll add something fun. And that way it kind of gives me a little more of like a plan because yeah, because in heavy paint, I feel like I don't necessarily do a lot of undersketch, just because the fan tool is something I really like, but it gives you a lot of ability to kind of like fine tune your shapes. So and I'll create new layers. Like if it's the sky, I will usually keep that in its own layer because I don't want to repaint clouds or paint around stuff. That's like not fun. Yes. Okay, so I'll start painting. Because that's what I should do instead of talking about it. Yes. Okay. Let's see. Oh, something fun I've noticed is like, so the grad out of the box is this very smooth grad, but if you want a little bit of texture, um, you can get like you can pick the footprint that has like a little bit of pixely flavor, so you get like a little bit more of like a crunchy grad. Um, in general, like if you look at these different footprints, if it mimics the same shape, because this is what it was originally, it will maintain like most of the same rules. Like if you try something super different, it may like not work very well. Like this is not a grad. So generally, like if you a good hint sometimes is if you look at what it default shape is, if it's not too far away from that, it will probably maintain like similar attributes minus whatever the like grittier texture. I think in fan gradient, I only ever switch between these two because most of the other ones are a little bit broken. Um, let's see. How do you change saturation? How do you get darker? So, essentially how it works. So, okay, you know what? I'll talk a little bit about this panel because it probably feels a little bit like mysterious. So, the way that RGB sliders work, from what I've seen, is essentially like this just tells you the quantity of the hue, right? If you're starting from 0 on everything, you get black. There's absence of red, green, and black. Or you could argue that it's the combination of all three 100% creating black. Doesn't matter. Either way, if you're like, okay, I'm going to increase red, you can see at the top panel here, like the color as well as down in the circle. But essentially, if it's 100% red, you will get like pure red. Same thing if you pull green up or blue, right? If you pull, if you're like, okay, we are at 50% red, for instance, and you drag green up, like essentially it's like, I guess you get more saturation and like the higher your, how to describe? It's like, I don't know how to actually describe this. Essentially, it's like the color purity will slowly become more pastel, essentially, the higher your combination is. I think it's essentially following the rules of like light mixing as opposed to print mixing. Um, although you could argue the other way, as long as you just look at it as like black is 100% like hue overlap and white up here is 0%. That would work as well. But essentially it's like the more close together these in a more like digestible version, essentially the closer together your little blobbies are, the more gray it will become because you're pretty much mixing equal quantities of each hue, right? If you know you want blue, then you just pull the blue thing as high as you want. And you're like, this will give you a very saturated, but also a very dark value, right? But if you're like, oh, I want to add more green to it, you'll start getting like teals. And if it's like too bright, right, you can like lower. You can essentially just, it's like, it's more about thinking about how they are in relation to each other. Like, it's like color mixing, but they've taken all the fun out of it because it's just little sliders instead of manually mixing it around. Um, but yeah, I think if you use them more, you start to kind of understand like, oh yes, I have this red, I have this like red, and I want it to be a little more purple, so I'm adding a bit more blue. But it's so saturated that I need to introduce a bit of its like complement at this point to kind of lower the saturation. Essentially, like the more they're close together, the less saturated. And if you have them far apart, you can create like ultra saturation. Um, if that helps. I don't think I've ever had to actually verbally explain that, so I'm sorry if it was a bit crazy sounding. Um, but yeah, that's my best knowledge of this particular RGB slider. Because I actually don't really know how to use the one in Photoshop, or when I use it, I don't like it as much. So it's very odd. Um, yeah, let's see. I actually think it's a little hard for me to like read the questions and do the demo. Is there any chance I could get questions read to me? In progress?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll do it. We'll look through them.
Thank you. Yay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I was like, "You're gonna look at a blank screen, like, sky,
I
the
know.
demo will finish." I'm like, "I'm done.
The
Done nothing,
multitasking.
sorry."
Yeah, we got you.
Thank you. Do, do, do. Mm, mm.
Hey Karen, I have a question. Um,
Yeah.
are you working off of a reference photo right now?
So I have this tiny photo that I took that I'm just looking at on the side. I guess there's no way to, like, let me see if it's, like, robust. I think it's okay if I do this. Okay, yeah, this is fine. You can import images and then paint over it. Or it's just kind of weird because it's not like I don't know, it gets kind of messy if you import an image and then you paint next to it. Because it starts to live on its own. Like you can't, I don't know, it's kind of wasteful to like give its own layer. So I usually just use like pure ref
Yeah,
or
that
just
makes
look at
sense.
map
Why
crash.
would you
Yeah.
waste the canvas space?
I know I usually don't mind because I'm like I'm pretty layer friendly and like layer happy in Photoshop, but here it's just like, man, every layer you make is like a strong decision for like that will slowly destabilize your file. So I'm always like, uh, let's see. There we go. Okay. I also, sorry, it's like a little clunky because I demapped I have like a hotkey like keyboard I usually use, and I had to unconnect it so I could reset everything. And now I'm like, that's fine. But I'm just gonna make a gradient for the sky, and then do clouds. Yeah, I love this lasso tool because you can. I don't know what it is about like the combination of it fills and then it like radiates from a center point. So when you draw, it's like just very easy to fine tune it. But I like this like crunchier one. This one's fun sometimes if you just want to have a little more noise. So I'll make some big old cloud shapes. Maybe we'll introduce a little more blue. Hmm. Wait, oh wait, what am I doing? There we go. Yeah, sometimes it's helpful to kind of, I guess I just treat it a little bit like traditional painting, where you have like you can kind of block in your like base, like underpainting a little bit, where it's like, okay, I know this is gonna be kind of bluish down here and like a little pinker up there. So I'll like hyper saturate my base. So when I paint over it, it can it'll kind of even out a little bit. Because I feel like something I really love is like when you look at like gouache or acrylic or oil paintings, you can kind of see some of the like crazy color they had from like the underpainting. Like I forgot which artist. There was an artist that would do like their underpaintings with like neon colors and then paint it all like with a relatively like naturalistic palette, but you just see like little hints of like that underpainting peek through, and I was always like really into it. So in a way, this app really is friendly for that, or at least encourages you to do that because it's uh, I don't know. All the brushes are like pretty crunchy. I guess because it's like vector based, you get a little more like gaps in between
Yeah,
pixels.
this is super wild seeing this like really cool like neon, and it's already like pretty different from the reference, like, but it's also like I can see where you're going with it. It's really
Oh, thank you.
underpainting already is like, whoa, where is this gonna go?
I don't know. All of us
You're like,
together.
where is it gonna go? I don't know. But that's good. I think it's fine.
I like to have a bit of ref just to anchor, like, so I'm not completely. Sometimes it's like good and bad, right? If you have like too much freedom, the painting just doesn't go anywhere in the end, or it just becomes like a hot mess, and you're like,
Yeah. But
um, but yeah, I always like to I always like to have a little bit of it, but I think my attention span nowadays is so short that I like get bored if I have to follow the reference too tightly. So I'm glad you think it's a fun thing, but I'm also just kind of like, if I'm sitting here painting, I might as well like add things and make
I
what I
mean,
like.
all
But
the studies you've been doing with Christina or Little Momo, like every Friday, have been super just interesting because you can see how you use parts of your reference, but then also how much you're breaking from it. And I think it overall makes a really compelling piece, you know? So
thank
I
you.
think that's what I'm kind of really interested in
Oh,
picking
thank you
up
so
from
much.
your demo is how close is too close and how close is not close enough.
For
Um,
sure. Yeah. I think like usually when I look at reference, sometimes I gather like a lot of very different reference together. Like I think there was one time I painted like a cow pasture, but I also wanted to paint like a gothic castle. So I was looking at like two different like I was looking at a lot of sunset paintings to figure out like the temperature relationships, but then I was like, oh, why not fill it with like a different subject matter? So I'm always a fan of like collecting and combining reference to figure out like different things. Um, yeah, but yeah, maybe let's see. Add a little bit of more. Yeah, I feel like a lot of like, I guess the more studies you do, eventually you can like break the rules a bit more easily. Because definitely this isn't like, oh yes, I was born like this and I can now make up all these palettes. It's definitely like it helps to study and know what like the what happens in nature, and then you have an easier time being like, but what if I made the clouds like super pink and weird, and hypersaturate stuff and use the subsurface, scatter to create like a pattern. I don't know. Um, but let's say, okay, so I'm actually gonna make a new layer because I'm pretty happy with this guy so far. So let's see. Uh, I think the one thing I have had to kind of get used to in this is that there's no way to like draw a straight line unless you use the line tool. Like you can't hold down shift and it will make a line that's straight. So sometimes I like to use the fan tool to create a straight line, or if I'm really desperate, I'll use an actual ruler and just draw with it to create a straight line. Yeah, that's my only wish is there was a shift, but it's okay. It's not too bad. We can do some mountains. Oh, gosh. Mm.
All right, we have a question.
Cool.
Adam was curious on how this program gets incorporated into your workflow at a job.
Um, it's hmm. Uh, I've only used it really in like super early, like thumbnailing or creating like sketches that are like just to create like a bit of flavor. But I largely still have to finish them in Photoshop just because of how uneditable the files are. Like they're great for like tiny thumbnails, but because I can't create like a layer for every element in case like at work it's like, you have to make a lot of adjustments or they want like subtle variations. And Heavy Paint isn't the most friendly for creating like adjusting things once you've painted them. Um, I did do like a job where I made everything in heavy paint, and it was I don't know if I would recommend it. It was really hard. Um, they wanted the like look feel of heavy paint, but when it came down to being like, oh, here's some, I'm pitching like a lot of ideas and uh, paintings that I then had to take to finish in heavy paint. It was kind of a slog. Like I essentially had to paint individual layers, export each individual layer, and compile them in Photoshop, and then re-separate and re-lasso out all those layers in Photoshop. So I had like a constant library of all the individualized pieces, and then I would re-import different individual pieces to paint in heavy paint to maintain my structure in Photoshop. It was insane. I like don't want to do it again. So I think it's great for internal use, or if you're like fast concepting and you know it's very like low stakes, I think it's great. It's a little hard to use like at work. Sometimes I'll do a whole painting in Photoshop like flat though, and then I'll bring it into heavy paint and do a separate layer and just paint all the texture and different cool like biddies I want into it, and then I'll export that one layer because you can export individual layers and they'll be on a transparent alpha, and then I'll reclip it to all the pieces I've already separated out. I think that's like the cleaner way, because definitely making shapes and layers as a base in heavy paint is incredibly they're really crunchy. Like the amount of half pixel like white and weird stuff started to get a little bit like too intense. So I would say if you wanted to use it professionally, maybe set up all your layers in Photoshop, and then you can export and paint those and import, paint those, re-export, and then you kind of have the best of both worlds. But it still ends up being a bit like exporty heavy, which is depends on how you feel about it. Mm.
We're finally getting to know your secrets. This is so exciting.
Yes. My secret is I use one tool in heavy paint. That's my true secret. It's very shameful.
Well, we know now.
But generally, like I like to block everything in flat in heavy paint first, or even in Photoshop. In general, I just like to block out all my shapes first, and then I can go in and paint in the lighting and other things. Let's see. The buildings are kind of boring. Maybe we can add like an antenna. Fun hack with the fan tool is if you just pull it really straight, if you can draw on a relatively straight line, you can create lines. Also why I really like this tool. But I'll make like a little radio tower maybe. It doesn't do as well with like small lines though, from what I just saw. So I'll probably switch to that brush. Oh, that's very thick. But yeah, I think for me, I really like heavy paint because it encourages you to be a little looser and a little more experimental. You can do all kinds of weird stuff with it, which is kind of fun. Build your own time. Um, But yes, also like I feel like with heavy paint, it you get like an immediate satisfaction of like stuff coming together quite quickly because you can't really. I mean, I think you can noodle in it, but whenever I noodle, it turns really really muddy. So I do kind of enjoy that this app has forced me to be like a little more decisive when I make things. So I don't know. It's kind of it's definitely like a polarizing app from what I've seen from friends, and like some people love it, some people super hate it, and I kind of understand why because I think the upfront like like it has kind of a steep learning curve just because so much stuff is a bit hidden and like there's no way to know what this stuff means unless you like sit down and mess with it. And even then it's kind of like you could understand the tool, but you're like, how do I make this look like not essentially like what I was drawing earlier, which is like a bazillion squiggles of like what is this? I don't know, maybe I'll have some rocks.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was just gonna ask, do you have any advice for someone to not hate this app when they're first starting out? Like,
Um,
any thoughts?
I mean, I I mean, I think I tried using this app like 4 or 5 times and I didn't like it every single time.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from the very beginning when he made it, I was like, "Ooh," and then I tried it and I was like, "Oh, no." And each time I made it, it was just like
This is crazy.
pain. Yeah, I was just like, "I don't think it's for me." And I think it's partially just like a mix, right? It's like, um I finally sat down in the recent times of being like, "Okay, I just wanna see what all the tools are. Maybe there's something in here that I've
I
missed."
know a lot
And
of
there
you
was.
guys are.
This whole brush panel was essentially what I was like, "Wait, I can, like, change the footprints," and, like, I use a lot of fan tool, like, some of my friends use, like, the hard round to paint with, or you can use, like, the crustier
Asking
brushes to
for a
paint with.
zoom in
It's
feature,
like
but
I
you
think it's
just
all
use it
about
to
figuring
this
out
is
what
zoom
tools
in.
complement what you
This is
already
zooming
like
out. You just go like
to
this.
use, and then it
You want to
becomes
zoom in?
easier to
Just go like
use.
this.
I think
You
in
want to
that way,
rotate
like,
the
some of
canvas?
this
Just go
stuff
like that.
is like, I've used, Vaughn's what is it?
Somebody on Twitter was
Heavy
asking
Poly
if I'm
config,
gonna
as
add
well
in
as, like,
a
just
mirror feature.
having a little
I just told
more
him to buy a mirror.
experience using like other software that I can kind of see why he built this way. Like the lasso fill is very like Blender, like when you select stuff or like it's like I can kind of see where his brain was when he made this stuff, and a lot of that stuff kind of makes sense to me because of the software and the experience I've had. So when I now use it, I'm like, oh yeah, like I can kind of see where I like it. But I think by no means is it like the program you have to use. Like if you feel like you don't really like it, it's really not the end of the world if you're like, I'm just not gonna use it. Which I probably shouldn't say at a heavy paint talk. But also like, it's just a tool. At the end of the day, it's just a tool, right?
Yeah.
Like if it helps you get where you want, like design wise, then that's great. But if you've, if you've tried like 5, 6, 7, 8 times and it's just not really working, it could just be you just don't really like the app. Like, I don't super love Procreate. I've tried like a billion times to use it, and for some reason, I just don't super like it. I think because the lasso tool is a little bit like not great, which makes sense because I'm like a lasso person. But their pencil tool's good. I will say that.
Mhm.
So yeah, yeah,
It's not like we want to hate, heavy paint. It's more like we all want to love it. I think.
yeah. It's
It's
the
just
app
like
isn't
it's like you're fighting it,
the base program's definitely like already like fighting you to begin with. It's like, do you want to love me? I'll make it really hard for you to love me, and you're like, "Ah, but I've seen cool stuff from you, and it's like I
Yeah.
didn't everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know what caused me to be a little less like brain melty using it. But I think also it was because I like professionally when I paint, it's very structured and it's very like meticulously organized that I just grew a little bit like tired of that. So my personal work, I started looking towards apps that were like more chaotic, which is why I think I really like this app quite a bit now. Um, because I've just learned to be okay with like paintings looking really bad. Like once in a while, I will make paintings and they'll just look like absolute like sad, like bad, like really bad.
And you don't show anybody.
And I just like delete. I just go to save. I go to delete, and the file is gone forward. I'm like perfect. And that's like
Nice.
that's fine. Like I don't know. I think it's okay, right? We're also hard on ourselves.
Mhm.
With art, I kind of miss when I was a kid and I could draw like the jankiest. Or I look at my niece, she draws like serial murder art. Like
What?
all the stick figures have like blacked out
Oh.
eyes and there's blood, but she'll be like, "Oh no, it's jello." But she's so happy when she makes all the art that I'm like, "Yeah, go for it." Like I love that for you. Like why don't I feel that kind of joy anymore?
That's great.
Right? I'm
Yeah.
like, so I don't know. Maybe it's like I think we punish ourselves with like hard to use apps because we kind of want to find like joy in like making kind of a dippy painting. I don't know, or maybe that's just me because at this point I'm like, yeah, if it's kind of cursed, then I've done my job.
I think
Uh,
I agree. Like, I mean, it's like instant gratification when you see something that's like really nice, right? And
yeah,
then I think heavy paint, I mean, you just have to get used to it in order to get that. But definitely the first couple tries, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing.
it's normal. Yeah, I definitely. Yeah, I for a while it was. I don't know. I still feel like I don't know how to use most of this app. Like I think this is just the niche I've carved out. Is like okay, I
Yeah.
4 tools, and it looks okay, and yeah, no, it's definitely kind of a weird. It's an odd duck of a program for sure. Um, but yeah, it can be kind of fun. All right, so let's see. Okay, because I've made this all in one layer, or this foreground piece, which is great, I can make a new layer and then clip it. There you go. There unfortunately are no layer modes in this app, so you'll never be able to use linear dodge or anything tasty, but that's okay. I feel like it kind of makes you kind of think about how to paint that into stuff, right? Um, so it's oh, I should probably put a sun, huh? I was like, there's a sunset, but there's no sun. I can't figure out my light direction. Uh, let's see. Maybe no. Nope. Okay, tip from Karen, please figure out where your sun is before you paint your entire painting and then have to squish it in somewhere compositionally that doesn't look bad. Would be cute. Yeah. Okay, I think this area didn't make me want to cry too much. Mm. Okay, we'll live with that. Maybe. I feel like I'm breaking the laws of physics now. The sun should probably be down here. This is watching Karen put a sun in the sky for 20 minutes.
It was great.
I
I was like, whoa, there's so many spots.
know. Okay, I'm just gonna roughly put it there because we'll just pretend the horizon is higher. I'll probably just move the mountains up. It's fine. It's good. I feel like with this app, it's kind of like, yeah, if something weird happens, you just kind of learn to like, like when you paint in acrylic and you have to kind of just like fudge it until it works. Like, yeah, it's kind of how I feel on this app.
Yeah.
Which is not bad. Just raise the horizon line. No biggie. It's fine. Now we have light direction. Yay. Oh, I would love to have heavy paint study sessions. We can all see what weird brushes we all gravitate to because I'm always really curious what other people use. I feel like it's like a personality test. Like, oh, you paint mostly with the rake tool? Interesting. Or it's like, oh, you only use the weird chunky tools? You must be a sociopath. No, that's not the case. But I'm always curious what other people use because I feel like there's definitely no wrong way to use this app. It's so experimental. But I'm always really curious what other people decide on. Where's that? Oh, maybe I won't clip this.
We're talking in chat. Oh, we should try to have heavy paint study sessions to force ourselves to use it and get to this.
Oh, yeah, that'd be fun. I wouldn't say no to that.
But it's gonna be so hard. Good.
Okay. It's I don't know what it is though, because I do feel like once I've gotten more used to it, it's like you can really paint stuff very quickly. I think it's just because you have to condense down all of the steps into like directly painting it. I do think it's like it kind of reminds me when I was in school and they made us do like a limited palette acrylic studies, and I hated it. It was like really hard, but man, it makes you really efficient. I feel like very quickly. So
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, the Zorin palette will like haunt me forever from school. But I do feel like it's kind of nice. If it, I do think actually something that did help a bit is like if you feel like because this is a lot. Like I'm essentially skipping like a bazillion steps painting this, right? Like I didn't do a drawing. I painted from back to front, which is like weird if you're like not used to it. And then I'm painting the layer, like lighting directly into it. You can always do it in grayscale. I've definitely done a lot of paintings and thumbnails in grayscale first in heavy paint, and it's at least just removes the whole color aspect of it, so you don't have to like worry. And then you can work up to like a monochromatic painting and introduce like one color and then slowly move up until you're doing like full color paintings. That might help a little bit because yeah, it's a lot. This is definitely like I feel like it looks effortless because you haven't seen like the mountain of awful, like god awful paintings I've made. Um, but knowing how to kind of break it down step by step will help for sure, I think, in maintaining a bit of sanity when you paint with this. Uh, I think once you figure out a way to do it, it's not as crazy, but it's yeah.
To really break down to smaller chunks, tackle a
Oh
full
yes.
painting. That was
I'm
really
always
cool.
oh thank you. Yeah, I'm always a fan of doing that because I don't know. You can brute force stuff to some extent, but it can get really hard, like tiring to have to do that. So I was trying to think of a way to make it a little more accessible. It's too much. Oh, it's too much. No. Yeah. What else should we put in this? Foreground shoot? I'm always like, should I put a large foreground element? Or is that a bad idea?
Hee hee. Chat, what do you guys think? What do you think Karen should add?
But yeah. Yeah, I'll add anything that's not crazy and difficult and that I can draw within like
Well,
5 minutes.
we need a
Mhm.
ghost, that's for sure.
Oh, a ghost.
Oh,
Yes, I
go.
want a ghost. It's October. Gotta add a ghost.
Yeah, Carmen agrees. We need the ghost.
Ghost has to go in. Let's see. Oh yeah, we can do it. I know we can do it. Yeah.
Ooh, someone says ghost cat or a cat.
Oh, okay. We can do ghost and ghost cat, like buddies.
Ooh,
Oh yeah.
this is getting good.
All my years of training have prepared me for this moment.
This is your peak moment, yeah.
Oh yeah. Nothing will top this. Okay.
Oh my goodness. So cute.
I will cry.
Ah.
It's like Roberto all over again.
Oh no, not Roberto.
I can draw him somewhere. It's getting crazy. Okay, I think I have to switch to okay. Are there any last questions? Anything I can answer from earlier as well, since that was like a truly horrifying dump of information. Thank you, everybody. I hope it was mildly helpful and you'll be able to customize your heavy paints.
It was amazing. Now I know something about heavy paint. I won't be completely terrified once I open it.
Well, when you open it, it'll be like empty.
That's true.
When I
Now
reset
I
it, I was
know.
like, oh wow, I have so much space. But also, I was like, oh geez. Yeah, no wonder I think the first few times I used it, I was like, I don't understand how to use any stuff. I think also I just don't like how that initial the default sliders behave because they're they're a little misleading where they don't turn like completely white or completely black if all the sliders are maxed out. It's just kind of odd. But yeah, I think the HSV box is probably like the most usable. It's like a normal palette. But yeah, there's a lot of cool. Let's see. Oh, I like this tool. This is my favorite thing I discovered with fan tools. So like if you have any questions about the fan tool, I'm an expert because I've used everything in it. But the fun thing is rake, right? That rake tool. When I first saw it, I was like, I feel like there could be something really cool with it, but it's kind of niche because you can only draw it like flat. But if you go to the fan tool and then you look at the footprint, you can get the rake tool, and then you can draw the rake tool and it'll perspect it essentially. It'll like follow because it'll follow your ground plane. So you could, or not ground plane, it'll follow your cursor. So you can essentially create like really easy like concentric lines that also follow the perspective that you've set. If you've ever wondered how you see people do that, it's because they're using the rake tool to create the fan tool to create like rake line effect. You can do it. It's really great for sand dunes. It's really good for dresses with stripes. Good for umbrellas. I don't know. Jellyfish. But yeah, it's actually pretty cool that creates a lot of texture. And it's easier to control, I think, than straight line version of it. This one. This is good for certain things for sure. Like if you just want like a straight stripe, but I don't know. Sometimes it's like too flat, right? Yeah.
It looks like we have another question. Somebody said, sorry if anybody has already asked this, but does anyone know how to merge down in heavy paint on iPad?
Oh, that's a good question because you can't hotkey it. I'm sure there's a way to do it. That's a good question, actually. Wait, I think I have it on my phone. Let me see. I'm gonna pull up heavy paint on my phone.
You have every single version.
I've given Vaughn so much of my money. It's like been installed onto like 3 work computers and like the phone one is probably the least stable though, because sometimes it eats my paintings, but it's also just so small at that point where the UI is like, let's see, there. Oh, I went through multiple work computers because they kept imploding. Like I had like overheating issues on laptops. I'm not gonna say it was because of heavy paint, but it happened after I installed it. It is slightly not optimized. Oh yes, that is something I've noticed. So for heavy paint, I think iPad is the most optimized feeling. Like you can get the most stability out of it, at least from my iPad Pro. But I have noticed like it does get a little freaky on like Mac OS or desktop. Like it's not the most optimized, so it will make your computer run hot. Just be a little careful when you open it up. See if your fan starts getting really freaky. Even on desktop, because I have a mobile. Maybe desktop's more stable for PC at least, because my iMac runs it fine, but it's kind of a big, heavy workhorse computer. But my mobile studio gets so hot when I open it with like one layer open. I'm like, oh geez. So just test it to make sure it doesn't like melt your computer. It shouldn't, but I have noticed it does seem to eat quite a bit of the resources of a computer when it's not on iPad. Yeah, I'm actually not quite sure how to merge on iPad. That's a good question. I think I've never really merged. I guess I just don't really merge very often because I find merging it's like you can't go back. Like if you merge, it even tells you like I think here I'll I'm gonna take a screenshot of this in case it dies. But I'll show you what happens when you merge. So when you go to merge, oh geez. When you hit like Control E, or well, sorry, I've mapped mine to Control E. But when you merge, it gives you this slightly freaky screen that says like merge is experimental. Like, yes, I have definitely had it just straight up crash when you hit merge if it's too big of a file. And you can't undo it, and it eats all the history from those two file layers, I think I mentioned before. So just be aware merging is pretty destructive to the painting, like you won't be able to go back. So I generally just don't merge very often. And it also, the more you merge, it will weigh down your file. It gets heavier the more you merge because it converts the vectors to pixels. So yeah, I don't know. It's a strange quirk, but I haven't found that I miss it too much. Just because it already is like not super layer, like you just really shouldn't make a ton of layers in this to begin with. And merging doesn't really solve that issue in this app. So that's too much. Oh, maybe I'll do a lens flare because I can. Do I want to do a lens flare? No, that's nah, that's okay. It does not need one. Oh, jeez. Okay. Yeah. Any more questions? I actually don't know how long this demo is running for. So however long you guys want to go until you are tired, I will.
Oh, it will never end then.
Okay. It'll be like Monday and we'll still be here
Oh yeah.
painting
I
the
would personally love to know how you export the files.
Oh, yes. Yes. Let me go over that. So, okay. So we'll just say like, okay, I'm pretty happy with this painting. Like, I want to export it. How do I export it? And what can I do? So when you go to the top left corner or wherever this is now, you hit the little floppy disk save. So it'll create this, it'll bring up this new menu. So essentially, like, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but essentially it's like there's the new where you can create a new file. You can import images, so you can only import PNGs, nothing else. It will not accept anything else. Like it won't acknowledge. Like if you open it, it'll only see PNG files. You can delete it if you feel hateful. There's stats, which is kind of funny. It like tells you what tools you use. It's like the most niche thing I've ever seen, but I kind of love it. But I also always feel like very seen where I'm like, oh god, I just used one tool. And how much you want to do, which is interesting. I don't know, it's kind of funny. And you can also resize your image. And there's actually something kind of fun about resizing. So essentially what you do is you just drag around and it'll only resize the canvas. It will not resize the image. So it's kind of handy if you're like, oh, I want it to be a little taller. And you hit OK, it'll just increase the canvas size, but it will also remember any overpaint you did. So if you painted outside of the layers, it will maintain that. I think if you even move it, it's like pretty aware of, like, you won't see it at first, but then if you hit check, you'll see it. It'll remember how far you painted. Because I paint with a fan tool, I tend to have like a ton of overpaint. So it's kind of nice if I'm like, I don't have to like fill it because I already did a ton of stuff with it. But if you're like, oh yeah, I think it crops essentially like evenly across all dimensions and grows at even dimensions. So the nice thing is if you crop and resize, you'll always have whatever's inside and out of it. Like if I'm just gonna remember this number, 1796 by, well, it's fine. If you were to make it really big, essentially here, I'll just make it really extreme and we'll just figure it out. You can see how much overpaint happened because of how I use the tool. That you can, but it'll always remember it. So crop isn't as destructive, which is kind of nice. So it's, it could be powerful if you want to reframe stuff. This is probably where I guess it's good to merge because then you can just move everything around once instead of like individually moving layers around. But yeah, it looks a little scary at first, but if you, hit check, it'll all come back. Yes. And okay, so don't worry. I saved out a JPEG earlier, so we'll have a nice version of it somewhere. Anyways, so okay, back to exporting. So we've gone over all that stuff. Now you're like, okay, I want to save it though. So I'm gonna go hit save, and I'm gonna go to export, this button. So when you go here, it gives you a lot of options, and you can check multiple ones, so it'll kick out like everything you need. So for instance, you're like, okay, I want to export the PNG. That just kicks out like a flat PNG of your whole painting, which is great, right? Probably what you want if you want to like post it somewhere or use it. Export HP exports it as a heavy poly file. So this program actually saves everything as HP files, not PSDs, not anything else, where it remembers the layers and all that stuff. So you can only open in HP. It is useful sometimes if you have a really like chunky file that you're a little scared might corrupt or vanish. You can save a backup in case it gets like in case it implodes down the line. I don't usually save them very often because HEAVYPAINT essentially just remembers all the files in here. You can look at my ugly weird paintings that I don't have anything of. But essentially like it'll try to replay it too, I think, if you go back and forth. Which is kind of cool to see. You can see like everything you do. But if you merge, you will lose parts of your replay, FYI. Like the layers that you merge down will just appear suddenly, like they won't remember all the strokes. So just remember, if you want to have cool videos, try not to merge. If you don't want to watch it, just hit replay. Something I really noticed, it is at its most unstable when it's doing this file loading, like this thing. I think it's actually loading all the layers in. It's not necessarily skip. Like it's weird. Like try not to go to another painting or do anything while it's loading. Like you can hit skip replay, but let it fully finish. And when it says canvas ready, then you can do stuff. Because I've noticed that for me, it crashes the most frequently in that little period of time. If I'm like impatient and I want to go do something, it'll crash. So just be aware of that. But back to export. Yeah, so you can export the HP. Export hidden layers means if you have obviously hidden layers, it will also export layers as PNGs. So if you have batch export layers, you can check export hidden layers and it will export essentially all of the layers you have as PNGs with like transparent alphas. So that's really useful if you want to like bring, like for instance, if I wanted to bring all these files into Photoshop or all these layers into Photoshop and kind of rebalance the levels or whatever, you essentially would get that and it will save it into a folder. So when you do that, like for instance, let's say I'm like, okay, you know what? I want to save a flat PNG and I want to save the export layers. Never really use transparent PG. And you can, size multiply it at that point if you want, but currently it's pretty big. It'll tell you like it's going to export 5K. I have noticed even when you tell it like 2K, when it exports, it automatically like doubles the pixel size. So it'll always be huge when it comes out. So just remember, you don't have to paint at 4K. It will be 8K and the export will be huge. And the file will get too gnarly. But essentially it'll open like a save canvas and then you can type your like, I don't know, beach name and it will create a folder that will populate all of the layers and files into it. So then you can use it. You just have to give it some time to do it. Yeah, but that's it. That's pretty much been saved out. Ta-da. Yep.
Yay,
Cool.
thank you.
Yep.
Does
And
anybody have any more questions? You guys can type it in the chat if you do.
yeah, no question is too small or too large. I'll try my best.
This demo was too powerful. Left everyone speechless.
Wow. That or everybody's like recovering from the. Even when I was putting together like I had like a small talking point for the panels. I was like, oh man, I think I can get this down to under an hour. And then I was like, oh man, I should try to get it down to like 30 minutes. It was so much. But thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks to you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. This has been so informative and helpful, especially for those who don't really know the program, like myself.
Yeah, for sure. No, I definitely any like small headaches I can try to spare a little bit from like the things I've run into. If anybody can use that, that's a victory, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird program for sure. It's very unique. I like hate it, but I also love it. It's very weird. Like
Love-hate relationship.
yeah. I mean, more recently things have been going well, no fights. But yeah, I don't know. It was difficult to
Yeah.
get to using it. For sure.
Well, I just posted Karen's socials in the voice chat one. So go follow her Instagram and Twitter. And this is recorded, so we will be putting it up on our YouTube. I can post that again in voice chat if you guys are not subscribed already. And one last announcement, a reminder for everyone to check out our Lightbox scavenger hunt and raffle this year. It's where you'll visit resolution artist tables and you can win cool prizes. And we will see you at Lightbox on that Saturday. Very excited for that. And Karen's in that too. Karen, Kat, we've got a lot of people.
Yeah. It's gonna be great. We're
Yeah.
excited. It'll be fun.
I'll put a link to that too. I'll just put this in the chat. And you guys can RSVP and it'll remind you too on the day. Cool. Dylan, do you want to say anything? You good? Okay. Are you done, Karen? You want to keep going on the demo or are you good?
No, I'm good. I finished.
This is so cute. I love it.
I will post it to that.
Yes, please do.
Share chat, event chat. Yeah, okay. For sure.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, thank you. Thank you, Karen. Round of applause for Karen.
No
Okay,
problem.
awesome.
Thank you, Karen.
Oh, no props.